Thoreau never ran away to Walden. He went to live at Walden Pond to find the time and solitude to write a book about the trip that he took with his brother John up the Concord and Merrimack rivers just a few years prior. But in a larger sense, he conceived of his experience at Walden as an experiment in simple living with the intention of discovering the necessities of life. Can you imagine going off to learn, what are life's necessities and how do we obtain them? And so Thoreau begins his book Walden Pond with the largest chapter of the book, and I don't know how many people even know what he named that first huge chapter in his book, but it's called Economy. Walden Pond is a book about economics. Now he comes at it a little differently from Marx, but they're really after the same thing. Using a play on words, Thoreau writes that he wants to examine in his chapter on economy, he wants to examine how, notice the play on words, how people spend their lives. He refers to Walden as his accounting of 2 years at Walden Pond. What a huge question. How do we spend our lives? Think of the double meaning or even triple meaning. And we will come closer to Thoreau and Marx in their concern that people are so burdened by their labor that they cannot enjoy the finer blessings of life. We are so burdened that we fail to nurture our spirits. Lacking leisure, we have no time to be anything but a machine. Now, Thoreau famously said, "The mass of people lead lives of quiet desperation." Wouldn't you agree there's very little difference between estrangement, alienation, isolation, and leading lives of quiet desperation? Thoreau seemed to echo Marx when he writes, "The cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life which is required to be exchanged for it." So in other words, how much of my life am I willing to give up in order to buy or consume or accumulate certain things? And while we're at it, what is really necessary for us to obtain? So this theme strikes a similar chord worthy of our contemplation in the whirlwind lives that we lead today. How much life is lost in the grind to simply survive? In fact, I think Thoreau seems to push the point a little harder than Marx by not only associating our alienation with becoming machines in the labor force, but he also points out that we are slaves not only to subsistence, but striving to accumulate more things than we need. Now, building his cabin at Walden, he wanted his readers to know that it is possible to provide one's shelter without mortgaging one's freedom. His words. See that? I got this shelter, didn't mortgage my freedom. Makes you think. Both Marx and Thoreau sound the alarms over our separation from nature. Marx insisted that the loss of nature in our lives meant feeling less fulfilled in our human nature. Now, instead of using the word human nature, Thoreau used the term self-culture. Both point to a qualitative existence that tends to the well-being of the soul. Living life deliberately, according to Thoreau, that was the well-being of the soul. Today, we would be more inclined to say, well, you don't hear people say nurturing, don't say living more deliberately, but we hear them saying, what seems to be missing is that I'm not really nurturing my spiritual life. Or better yet, we develop a sense of a need for appreciating and growing sensitive to the spirituality that is there in everyday life. We seem to get further and further away from those very precious elements. Thoreau, in fact, along with all the transcendentalists, and Karl Marx, who lived in the same era, we can't forget that, with very similar sensibilities, they all looked at nature as a source of revelations concerning the spiritual life. And so nature is celebrated not solely for its beauty, but as a means of teaching us about the natural order of things, teaching us how we might live our lives. Thoreau's friend and benefactor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, chimes in with his observation and lament. We divorce ourselves from nature. We hide ourselves in cities and lose the affecting spectacle of the day and night. We pave the earth for miles with stones and forbid grass. We build street on street all around the horizon and shut out the sky and the wind. Thousands are poor and cannot see the face of the world. The senses are impaired and the susceptibility to beauty. And life is made vulgar. And Thoreau adds, if the day and night are such that you greet them with joy, and life emits a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs, and life is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. Thoreau and Marx, seldom yoked together, yet kindred spirits, offered a direct response to the conditions of life in their day. The issues were heightened for them because of the contrast between the lifestyle of the farm and industry, factories. And for them it was a spiritual matter, just as we hear cultural critics speak of these issues today. A reverence for nature is indispensable to the welfare of the soul. And yet we witness today an almost vicious degradation of land, wilderness, of nature. Our ruthless destruction of nature for personal gain has wrought climate change, which unleashes devastating effects upon this earth, casting doubt about the earth's future and life as we know it. So this is our current malaise. This represents our current feeling of alienation, isolation, as our values differ so radically from our political leaders, even the ones we voted for. Instead of Walden Pond and its intrinsic scold for spending our lives unwisely and failing to invite nature as our teachers for how we ought to live, we have developed now the real popular subject of eco-psychology. My goodness, you can major in eco-psychology in virtually every college campus, and you can get your doctorate in eco-psychology and set up a practice that helps those of us who are alienated to understand fully the emotional connection between the human world and the natural world. And I'm not making fun of eco-psychology. It's there, it's necessary. Some of my best friends are eco-psychologists. They really are. It's amazing how, it has just evolved from a very simple statement, understanding, emotion. Marx and Thoreau were separated from nature, and now we get real fancy. A doctorate in eco-psychology that says, there really is a connection between human life, natural life, and we're losing it. Same thing that was said 170 years ago. And E.O. Wilson comes along, Harvard's renowned biologist. What he actually does is give credibility to what Marx and Thoreau maintained all along, that humans have, it goes a little bit further, humans have this innate instinct to connect emotionally with nature. And that connection is being trashed today. A so-called new field that has just exploded, that studies the effects of nature deficits. It's been around now for years, and it studies the effects of nature deficit, especially on children. And if we could paraphrase Emerson, it would sound something like this: young people are divorced from nature and hide themselves behind computer games. They have lost the spectacle of the day and night that instruct her children. The feelings, alienation, isolation, estrangement, anything but new in the world today. The prophets, like Marx and Thoreau, felt very deeply that our chief aim as human beings upon this earth was the unfolding of our own human nature. That was the essence of what they were about. That's why we're alive. It's the unfolding of our own human nature. And Thoreau would add, a divine impulse at the core of our being impels us to this. Our own nature, our own human nature, is not unfolding, because we're either busy just surviving or we're hopelessly addicted to consumerism and working and working and working. We have lost a connection with nature as we abuse the water, the air, the soil for selfish, immediate gains. The wilderness, the desert, no longer serve as our teachers. But we read with sentimentality how Thoreau spent 2 years at Walden Pond, sitting wrapped in a reverie from sunrise until noon, amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around or flitted noiseless through the house, until by the sun falling in the west window, or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, he was reminded finally of the lapse of time. He grew in those seasons like corn in the night. This was not time subtracted from his life, he wrote, but so much over and above my usual allowance. How much of our life is lost in the usual, predictable patterns of our habits? Is it even possible to nurture our spirit while feeling ever increasingly divorced from nature? How do we nurture our spirit? And then, of course, more importantly, what are the implications for our children and future generations? I'll leave you with one last question. How do we spend our lives? So be it.